In the 21st century, I guess to some extent as time past as well, but certainly in the future, it is going to be really, really critical to work together, to get along with other people, to understand other cultures. And part of that is knowing oneself, of course, too. I guess a good example would be what's going on now in the world with cancer research, where it's moved beyond an isolated scientist in his own lab or her own lab to teams working together in different disciplines, but related, across institutions and even across national borders. And that's how it's happening right now in the 21st century, and that's going to continue. Emotional intelligence involves more self-knowledge, self-control, self-awareness. And social intelligence has more to do with how one interacts with other people. Students who are strong in this area are more confident. They feel good about themselves. They're not afraid to take on new challenges, and they don't have the same, I guess the word might be baggage, of some students who are not strong in this area. They're not afraid. They have a certain peacefulness. Absolutely not. They're complementary. And in fact, students who don't have good social emotional intelligence are really handicapped in schools. You learn best when you're relaxed, when you feel accepted. And if students are afraid, if they're worried about things going on at home, especially if they don't feel accepted by other students in the class or by the teacher, that's not conducive to learning at all. So they're very, very complementary. I find that there's a much more relaxed atmosphere. Kids are much more receptive. There's almost a certain joyousness in the classroom. And people, as I say, feel accepted by their peers, accepted by the teacher. We all know, for example, if a teacher doesn't like a certain student, that's very obvious to others in the room, and it's open season on that student. So it definitely has a big impact. One of the big things is teacher modeling. If the teacher practices good social emotional skills with students and with colleagues and with parents, I think that's the primary way. And there are also a number of excellent programs, for example, mindfulness. There's a great series of videos on Susan Kaiser Greenland that are on the internet on mindfulness. There are programs like The Leader in Me, and there are very specific programs to teach social emotional skills, especially to students who are really lacking. Some students don't even know the basics like saying please and thank you, looking at people when they speak and so forth. But there are lots of programs to deal with this, but I think it's primarily teacher modeling. I think if students are strong in this area, if students feel accepted themselves, if there is a community feeling in the school, and even if a teacher can create a family within the classroom, those things are much less likely to happen. Now, bullying is not eliminated, but I think in a school where social emotional skills are developed and valued, then it's much less likely to occur. I think the big thing is that if students feel safe and feel valued, they're much more likely to want to volunteer, to do things, to try new things. So I think that's the primary way. I see personalization as the child being the curriculum, and I see it as a belief or a practice of trying to make each student be all they can be, to draw on their talents and their personalities. And personalization is really important for schools and for students because we want students to be really motivated. We really need to develop each student's individual talents, and I think the most important thing is motivation and engagement of students in what they're doing. Not at all. I think they can be in sync. I see, as Chris mentioned, I think the standards are the starting point. They're only a starting point, though. And in schools where personalization is used, students really do very well on standardized tests. I think students feel good if they're working at the correct level for them. If they're not working on material that's too easy or too hard, where they're challenged but they don't feel discouraged. So I think that's how it really helps students and motivates them. In a typical classroom, every minute of every day is not going to be personalized. That's not really possible. But students can work on projects that are self-chosen. They can work on authentic programs. They can work across grade levels with students of the same readiness levels that they have in various subject areas, for example, literacy, math. No, I don't see it limited at all. I think obviously there are certain limitations when kids are young. They need a lot more direction. You can't send them out into the world to do their own personal investigations. Whereas with older students, sometimes you can have them working outside, for example, in a law office, in museums and theaters, not all day, but part of the time. I think it's a little bit, well, I wouldn't say it's easier, but there's more flexibility as students get older. But it's important for all kids at every age. Well, I don't think in a traditional classroom where the teacher is standing up delivering material that's necessarily personalization. I think it can be very impersonal. So I think it can be personal without the teacher being at the child's side all the time. I think the teacher has to be aware of what kids are doing, and there has to be some one-on-one time with kids, or at least working with small groups of kids. But the teacher doesn't always have to be in front of the child. And in fact, I think children learn a great deal by figuring things out on their own sometimes. One of the things is having teachers work together in groups, having professional learning communities. I think that's the kind of fundamental, so that teachers don't think of students in their class as just being kind of their property for the year, that teachers are more flexible in terms of what students are doing. So I think there has to be a certain amount of teachers working across grade levels with groups of kids who might not all be in, for example, grade 2. And I think teachers who have a particular interest or talent, for example, some teachers are so awesomely gifted in terms of art, music, theater, and those things can be incorporated, those talents can be incorporated into teaching with students who have the same kind of interests and talents. School, unfortunately, only celebrates a pretty narrow range of talents, mostly math and reading and writing. Some aspects are the academic areas, at least some of the academic areas. Others can be activities that go on in school, orchestra, for example, drama, those sorts of things. I think the big thing is teacher training, that teachers really understand the concept. I think perhaps it has to be introduced initially, maybe gradually, otherwise you could have chaos easily. But I also think it's important that parents really understand the concept and how their child is going to benefit. Well, I think with parents have to really understand it, and they have to be supportive of the school. And I think in Radiant schools where that is working, that is the case. I think sometimes it can be a little difficult for some students initially, but I think children really like the idea and of their needs being met where they are, and I don't think generally they mind moving around. Yes, I think schools can achieve personalization. I think if they're flexible, if they're creative, if they work together in teams, I don't think there's a need for more resources. I guess schools can always use more resources, but no, I don't think that's an impediment. Well, I think the teachers in the school have to be aware of what the expectations are, and what the content of standardized tests. You can't totally ignore that. But again, I come back to the same idea that I think that's a kind of baseline thing, and I think in many ways that personalization is going to prepare students for success at really any university that they're interested in and are able to get into. Well, I think students learn because often they're working, especially as they get older, more independently. They learn really good work habits. They learn to organize time. They learn to organize materials, to work together with other people. And that's really what life is about. Even life, in a university involves working together. Well, technology is a key part of personalization. Technology enables kids to learn at their own pace, to learn using their own learning style. There is so much information that is out there. There are so many different approaches to academic learning as well as other kinds of learning. I think that personalization without the use of technology would be very, very difficult. Fortunately, we're in a new era and we can use those tools. Well, it changes a lot. I come back to teachers have to be more flexible. They have to be willing to work with many different groups of people, and they have to learn to work together with other teachers. It's very different from the stand and deliver model that most of us are familiar with. So I think initially it can be difficult for some teachers, but I think most teachers in our experience who are using the model really like it and find it very fulfilling and rewarding themselves. Well, I come back again to the idea of institutional support and also having professional learning communities where teachers share ideas, responsibilities, where they encourage one another, where they're working really as a team, not just an individual. So I think it implies that the teacher can and is willing to work with other people. I don't think that personalization necessarily requires more resources, but it does mean that the teacher is going to be constantly kind of examining what they're doing, working together as a team. So I think it's a very dynamic sort of process. I don't think it's something that you just begin and end, it's ongoing. Well, educational technologies are important for personalization in many cases. They certainly greatly enhance personalization if used well. However, they're not central to the concept of personalization. Personalization can take place, for example, outside of school. Personalization can involve interests. So it doesn't necessarily require a high use of technology, but as I said, technology does enhance personalization. There have been many teachers in the past who have used personalization with little or no technology, but it's certainly an asset.